Sorry that you had me right after lunch. If you take a nap, it's cool with me. The slides are actually just got posted to Sakai, so you have those to look at if you'd like to. I'm a prior Air Force flight surgeon and internal medicine doc, and retired about 40 pounds ago. And I used to, so I had kind of two parts of my career. The first part was doing more flight medicine and CCAT stuff, doing critical care air transports. And then the last part I ended up moving over into a program the Air Force has called the International Health Specialist Program. And so I was in that program for several years and was the director for the Air Force for a couple of years. So since then, I still do stuff in kind of the global health and travel health arena, partly for DoD folks like here for USHUS and for the Defense Health Agency, and then also with a civilian company called Shoreland, who owns a product called Travex that will be one of the things we'll talk about in the resource section here. And so I keep myself busy with about 4 or 5 part-time jobs. So if anybody has any, I'm going to leave my cards down here on the table afterwards, and if anybody has any questions on any of this, or if you're interested in knowing more about the kind of the global health opportunities in any of the branches, or anything to do with travel, tropical medicine that I can help you with, then please let me know. I took this course in, date myself, in 2000, but then I actually used to run the field sites from 2001 to about 2011 or 12. I would have one of the 2-week rotations out. It seemed like every country I went to then kicked the entire United States out of it, like Ecuador and then Bolivia, and then, so I think that's the reason that I no longer help you guys with the 2-week courses. We're running out of locations, and they don't want that to happen. So I mentioned I work for Shoreland, just so you know that, but we won't be doing any, that's the standard disclaimer otherwise. And what we want to do is talk a little bit about some of the different kind of categories of information that you guys can look at when you're trying to find some information, and then go through some of those resources. A few with slides, and then I'll jump on the internet and kind of go over a couple of them so you can kind of see them live, and close out with a little bit of just a quick talk about some of the telemedicine issues out there. And so I think most of you already know this, so it's kind of a little bit of a redundant slide in ways, but the information that we tend to look at, and especially now you're going through a 4-week course that's intensive in tropical medicine and infectious diseases, but you're going to get back to your bases, and you're going to be, some of you are going to use it on a daily basis, but a lot of you won't. And so then you're going to come back and you're going to have a deployment you have to put together. You're going to end up having to get somebody out the door on a TDY. You're going to kind of have to revert back to what you did know. And so some of it is just kind of maintaining an awareness of what are the things you need to be looking at. And this is a whole laundry list of potential things that you may or may not need to have for your deployments. And so the question is just, where do you find information on all of these different things? And so that's what we kind of want to do, is talk a little bit about it. And your job isn't to be an expert in every one of these areas and to know everything, but your job is to be able to find that information out, find out who the experts are, pull information from them. And you may be the expert in many of these, but then also just to, overall at a baseline, maintain some level of situational awareness, so that every time you get a question, you don't have to start at ground zero. Maybe you have a little bit of a background information on the issue, and it can kind of help you as you prepare. And so, hopefully this and the rest of this course, as well as some of the time that you work in your individual jobs afterwards, will help you get to where you may not be an expert, but you know how to get answers really quickly. So you'll see this probably in a couple different places, but the other thing to keep in mind as we talk through this is there's just a ton of information out there. And so oftentimes you're asked to prepare something and you don't have a lot of time to prepare it, or you just don't have a lot of time to give your briefing and to tell somebody about what the potential risks are. So keep in mind that, as a rule, the things that tend to be occur with a higher frequency, and or the things that have a higher severity are those things that you're going to want to have at the top of your list. And the things that are down a little bit, that might be a lower risk are things you need to be aware of, but may not be part of your briefing or part of what you put together. And so this is a matrix that NCMI uses, and so when we show you the National Center for Medical Intelligence website, you'll see that they have things listed, as red, yellow, and green. And this is the kind of a matrix they use for determining whether or not they're going to put them into one of those categories. So where do you find these answers? And so many of you probably have done this a few times and may have some places that are your go-to places that you use. So as we talk through some of these, please, if there's something that I have missed, I just may not be aware of it. And so please let us know, or let us know what your experience has been with some of the ones that we talked about as time goes on. One of the things you can do is look at open sources. One of the great things about the internet is there's a ton of information out there. And one of the sucky things about the internet is there's a ton of information out there. And so how do you know out of all that information, what is reliable, what do you want to use out of all that information? So like right now, if somebody said, hey, can you tell me a little bit about Zika, since that's been in the news in the last year, and you didn't really know a whole lot about it, and you just Google Zika, good luck getting something put together based on that, unless you have a day to read a whole bunch about it. You're probably going to end up being directed all over the map with it, because what gets on the top of your Google search is not necessarily that thing that's going to really help you the most from a provider perspective. So it's readily available, it's easy to access usually, as long as you have an internet connection, and oftentimes fairly timely. And the things that are kind of old tend to go to the bottom of the search engines, or you just can't find it as easily. But one of the difficulties is it's not always reliable. I shouldn't say not reliable, I should say not always reliable. Sometimes it's very reliable depending on where it is. But it is time intensive to cull it, and more often than not, it's not been like really well analyzed and vetted. It's not like there's somebody that has expertise in Zika who's been taking that information and teasing it out, making sure you have the right story. Again, sometimes that's the case, but not always. There are some apps that we'll talk about later, but I found that currently no one makes any money off of it. No one wants to advertise on an app about travel and tropical medicine, so nobody actually spends their own resources to develop many of them. So there aren't as many mobile applications out there as you'd like to see. So what are some of those open sources? This is a list of some of them. If you have this in the PowerPoint mode, so somebody helped me put this slide together, because I don't have my PowerPoint Rangers slide a few years ago. And each of those is a link to that, to whatever that website is. And so you can just click on those when it's in a presentation form, and it'll take you to there. Or if you right click on it when you're not in a presentation form, it'll give you the URL for it. And so these are all a bunch of different open sources that are out there that you can potentially look at. Some of them are about diseases, some of them are about surveillance, some of them are about animal health, but all of them do relate in some way to travel and tropical medicine. And so there's many more besides this, but that's kind of maybe a good starting point. If you take a look at a couple of those, I'll just point out a few of them. So some of them have to do with surveillance. This is the Florida Department of Health has one, and it has everything from where are we finding mosquitoes to what are the number of diseases that are occurring in an area. And this is I throw Florida up here, but many of the states have these, and then also internationally, many of the ministries of health maintain their own websites that talk about surveillance, whether it be disease surveillance or in some cases vector surveillance. And they can be helpful. One of the difficulties with them, and it's usually pretty self-evident when you get into the science, is do you think that information is fairly reliable? And some of it you can tell based on dates. So if you have information on something that's from 2015, probably not going to help you as much today as you'd like it. Sometimes you can see that it just makes no sense, like there will be a disease that's transmitted everywhere except for one county or one province doesn't have it. And sometimes you think, well, okay, well, maybe that province doesn't have it, not because there's no disease there, but because their reporting system is screwed up or their detection system is screwed up, and so it's just not reporting it well. So as you look through surveillance sites, then just kind of be aware if there's something that looks like an anomaly, oftentimes that site's a little bit less reliable. And so I don't really have a list of which ones are absolutely reliable and which ones are trash. It's almost more of a focus of looking at them and kind of getting a feel for how they put their information up there. There are several infectious disease sites out there. This is the one from the Center for Infectious Disease Research and Policy, and you'll see that they have, in addition to things that they, are things they're currently focused on, usually they'll have some sort of a news scan like over here on the side that's updated on a fairly regular basis with some information on different outbreaks that are occurring. Sometimes it's both animal and human, and sometimes it's just human. Another one that I'll reference a little bit later and show you too, when we're looking at surveillance issues in general, is ProMed, and ProMed has a similar kind of approach to this. There are animal information out there that is important for us to know. I mean, many of you are kind of either in a job that kind of keeps that One Health perspective going, where the link between human and animal health, and so many of the things that either veterinarians or public health officials that look at animal health run have an impact for us in our human health, either directly or indirectly. And some of it is, looking at things like vaccine production, oftentimes is for both, and certainly with disease events themselves, oftentimes a disease outbreak can be directly related to or can foretell a potential human outbreak. For example, the recent yellow fever outbreak that occurred in Brazil ended up, there were a lot of problems with yellow fever in the primate population prior to that. It kind of let people know, okay, something's a little bit different this year than prior years, and we might have a bigger human outbreak as well. There are health maps out there. This is one of them. There are different kind of mapping softwares that different organizations use. Health Map tends to have alerts that occur, and it basically what it does is it goes out and it combs a lot of other sites and pulls in information from them. So the people who run Health Map don't actually do the research themselves. They actually are just giving you a single source where you can see it, and then they'll reference it. So you'll click on one of those little circles there, and it'll tell you there was a ProMed report of whatever in this location. And then if you want to investigate it a little further, you can go to the source. And there's also one that is done by USAID that runs through the same company basically, that looks at animal sampling data as well, and that one's called Predict. And then there are things that have to do with humanitarian assistance and disaster relief that also oftentimes have human health issues associated with them, either because of the fact that there's a complex humanitarian emergency there and there are health issues like a cholera outbreak or something like that, or just because it's an area where you might end up seeing more health issues because of the fact that you have a population that's either in a displaced environment or in a refugee environment. And so ReliefWeb is one of those. You'll see some things. This is one from the Pest Management Board under the Department of Defense that actually looks at different pests and where they're located, gives you some information on them and on some of the issues with antidotes, and certainly from a tropical medicine standpoint, snake bites and the results of that are something that we're concerned with. And speaking of that, another good resource for that is actually the University of Adelaide's toxinology site. And I use this one a little bit more than I use the pest management for actually finding out where anti-venom is in a particular country if I'm worried about anti-venom in one of my missions. And so those are just a few examples of some of those different open sources that are out there. But a couple that you probably use routinely are the CDC and the World Health Organization. So the CDC has its main pages, which have a lot to do with communicable diseases in general, but they also have a traveler's health section where you can go by destination and learn a little bit more information. And they focus a lot on immunizations. I'll show you in a minute when we go live on it, but they also have many of the local diseases that are there as well. Another place is the World Health Organization. The World Health Organization ends up having probably a heavier emphasis on non-communicable diseases than it does on ID and the kind of things that we're worried about in a travel medicine or tropical medicine environment, but there is some good information there, both in their programs and in their health topics, as well as by country. So we'll take a look at those a little later. The Army Public Health Center, which used to be the Army Public Health Command, which used to be VETCOM and CHIPM, and its continuing evolution of names, has a pretty good site out there. It has a lot to do with animal, or a good section on animal health, because the veterinary corps is focused on keeping that up to date, but it has a lot to do with PrevMed and public health as well. So there's definitely some good information there. And the Navy has a site as well that I'll show you in a minute. Oh, if you're ever traveling somewhere and you're looking for safe food and water, these are a couple of addresses where you can send an email and tell them, I'm taking a group of 10 people to Botswana, and I'm wondering, are there any approved food sources or water sources in Botswana, and they can send it back to you. They used to keep all that information public, but they ended up having a lot of problems with people saying, hey, why isn't my restaurant on your established list? And it was just because no one had done an inspection of it, but just the hassles that they went through in trying to maintain the site and answer the questions became a little overwhelming. So now you just contact them on a case-by-case basis, and they'll give you that information. This is the Navy site that I was mentioning earlier that also does public health and environmental health. So the Navy Environmental Preventive Medicine units use this as a page where they can give you information on their various areas of responsibility and what they're doing and what they're finding in there from a focus of preventive medicine, environmental health, and population health to a large degree. So those are some open source things, but then there are some places where you just have limited access to it, and you either need a subscription to it, or you need a password to it, or you need your CAP card to get into it in the case of the military. And so oftentimes those can be open sources. They just have you just can't get to it from Starbucks without your CAP card maybe, or without a password. And so that controlled access can sometimes be an advantage, because the people that run those tend to then focus on you and on the kind of issues that are most important to you. The disadvantage can be that access sometimes. If you're traveling, internationally, and you want to get onto a site, and it requires a .mil connection of some sort, or more than your CAT card, or you don't have a CAT card reader, and you need to get onto the site, then sometimes that access can be a disadvantage. The validity is sometimes there, not always there, so just keep that in mind. But usually those sites are a little more reliable as a rule than the open source sites are. And so again, here's a list of some of the different limited access sources that are out there. And a couple of them that you'll come across are our own medical service libraries. And so I know the Navy has a virtual library. I've never, for 10 years, I've tried to get into it, and they don't even answer my emails because I don't have the right handshake. But I know there is a Navy virtual library. So for the Navy folks, if you just check within your systems people, I'm sure they can tell you how to get to that. And I'm sure it has similar capabilities to these. So there's a Defense Health Agency medical virtual library that you end up having to sign up and ask for a username and password, and once they validate that you should have access to it, you get a username and password for it. The Army's virtual library does not require a password, and the Air Force Medical Services virtual library, there is a process where they have to validate your CAP, but you don't need a password for just your CAP. And so all of them also have a virtual library, and usually those libraries have access to anything from PubMed or ways that you can get to articles. So if you're looking up, you want to look at scholarly articles on a particular infectious disease or tropical medicine topic, you can find them that way. But they also sometimes have subscriptions to things like UpToDate, where you can go in and you can actually look up the treatment for something, from a reliable medical source. Occasionally they'll also have links to other things that you have a subscription for, as military members that you're not paying for, but that the medical service is paying for at large. So those are a couple of different service libraries that are out there. We'll look at this site, but there's the National Center for Medical Intelligence. So those of you who are as old as I am, I used to know this as AFMIC, the Armed Forces Medical Intelligence Center, but it's several years ago switched over to NCMI out of Fort Detrick. They have a lot of information on there. One of the things, and I'll mention this since I don't think they're coming to talk to you guys, and in some years they have actually come and given a medical intelligence brief. But one of the things to keep in mind with them is that they are the DoD, the official DoD medical intelligence source. They fall under the Defense Intelligence Agency, not under the Defense Health Agency. And the thing that's kind of important about that is that, as such, they are not a non-combatant like you guys are. So from a Geneva Convention standpoint, they cannot ask you to go out and actively collect information on a location or on diseases or on hospital capabilities. If you do that in your force health protection role, you are certainly welcome to and should share that with them, but they can't actively send you out. So if there's a problem somewhere, the only people they can send out are intelligence officers, some of which have a medical background, some of which don't, to there. But for that reason, sometimes you'll see their sites are very robust in areas where we're extremely active in operations, but in sites where we're not as active, they may not have had the opportunity to dedicate analysts and time and resources to those areas. And so keep that in mind as you look through them. And there's a couple different ways to reach out to them. And if you do reach out to them, and it's just for you and 5 people, classically what they've done when I've called them is they've said, here's where on our website you can find the information you're looking for. If you happen to be taking 100 people out somewhere and it's a big mission, then sometimes they'll actually have the ability to dedicate an analyst to help you prepare some information for wherever you're going. Travex is the other one I mentioned, so you can get to this through the Military Health System portal or through the Air Force Knowledge Exchange's virtual library. Either one of those will get you into it. And then once you get into it, you can set up your own username and password and get into it from Starbucks without having to go through that. And one of the things that's a little different about Travex is that it has both government and corporate clients, and so information goes both ways with those clients. And so sometimes clients are providing information out of, so maybe British Petroleum's in an area and they know a lot about what's going on there. They'll provide that information to Travex. You'll be able to access it as a DoD member. You just don't know, where that data came from was masked to you. There are some places where you can get some COCOM guidance. The only one that's really robust is AFRICOM. They keep theirs up to date on this site. This also runs through the Defense Intelligence Agency, these first 2 links there. The first one is basically the Force Health Protection Guidance for their AOR, and the second one is information that you can look up different after-action reports on activities that have occurred in the various countries within their AOR. The other AORs tend to send some of their information to NCMI, and you can sometimes find it there, but oftentimes you actually have to reach out to those areas of responsibility yourself to get the information that you really want from them. So let me show you a couple of those, just since a couple of those are the limited access ones, and then you can just kind of do a little compare and contrasting. When you make this a little bigger, so this is the NCMI site, and so when you get to it, it obviously has this front page here that if there's a certain topic of interest, then you can just click on it. A lot of times, when you click on these, you'll see that, again, going back to the issue of, is it something that's a current military threat? The dates on this go back, 15 months or so on their information on Zika. And it doesn't mean that it's not accurate or not up to date. You sometimes just wonder, is there something that's happened in the last 15 months that would be different about that? And so sometimes if something's really active, it may be really fresh information. If it's something that you're kind of past peak on, it may not be quite as fresh. Then if you go and you can look things up either by country or by command. So let's go to Colombia today. So we're heading down to Colombia, then it has a series of products that are available to you over here on the left. Blood safety indexes don't tell you about the safety of blood in a particular hospital. They just tell you about the system within the country. And they have one of these on every country. They're fairly up to date, and it just kind of tells you overall how they work it. There are chemical health risk assessments, which are also called environmental health risk assessments. Again, date-wise, this is from 10 years ago, but a lot of the information doesn't change, because when it has to do with the physical environment, the topography, the climate issues, there's not much difference. And then from an environmental contamination, it looks both at the environment and then at air, food, soil, and water contamination options. So all those are on that environmental risk assessment. Then they do have information on health systems, but it's all SIPRNet. So if you don't have a SIPR access, you won't be able to get it through NCMI. You'll have to actually find a SIPR terminal, get on it, and get at it that way. And the same is true with any industrial facilities, which is more of a CBRNE issue, worried about issues of whether or not there could be, some sort of an environmental hazard from an explosion or something like that. So one that we use a lot is this infectious disease risk assessment. And this is where I was saying that when you take a look at their assessment, they kind of use that matrix to put things into the class of high, intermediate, or low as far as the risk is concerned. And they go over both food and waterborne, vector-borne, and then other diseases is how they lump them together. If you click on any one of these on the left-hand side, it won't tell you about protozoal disease in Colombia. It'll just be an overview of protozoal diseases. If there's something on the right-hand side over here, like a map, then that will actually be specific to Colombia. So like if you want to look at their malaria map on Colombia, then you click on the map function over there, and it'll pull up their map. And so this is their map. Their map is a, look at bigger than I thought it was going to be. Their map is a potential attack rate. So you can kind of see that they have rates from 0 to less than 0.1% are rare. Less than 1% is a small number, and then the larger orangish areas are where the potential attack rates up between 1 and 10%. And that's based on somebody who's not taking any precautions, not based on somebody who's actually taking appropriate precautions. They also, in addition to those maps, if you, they don't have a great way of going back except for having a back key. If you go to the Forest Health Protection recommendations, they also have here just some of the recommendations, and many of these are just stating the obvious to you guys since you know these things, but sometimes there's some new information here on what you would want to do, whether it's hand washing and in the case of bacterial diarrhea, or whether it's something to do with vaccinations and other cases. So that's NCMI. Does anybody have any questions on that, since that's kind of an important one? Anyone have any comments on whether they've had great success or not so great success with it? Another one that we talked about earlier was actually going to the CDC. So the CDC site is here for travel issues, which is where they put most of their tropical medicine. I don't know if any of you have ever used the Yellow Book. Yellow Book's a pretty nice resource. When you go that way, it actually, it has, you can just, go to the table of contents and take a look at it. And you kind of see it has everything to do with consultations, conditions themselves, to immunization recommendations. And you can download this to your phone or tablet to have with you as well. And so it's it's a pretty good book. Another way to get things though is to look through diseases. Now that won't be specific to a destination, but will give you some information on particular diseases. Or you can go to a destination if you went somewhere and use that to find out some information on there. So sticking with Colombia, we go there. What they have on it starts with some recommendations for vaccines and medications. And so this is where a lot of people get their vaccine recommendations. Now we in the military have an immunization healthcare branch that gives us our vaccine recommendations and the DoD requirements. But oftentimes we're taking care of civilians and their families as well, or dependents of our active duty, and so oftentimes this can be a resource where people can take a look at different immunization recommendations. But it's also about medications, so you can kind of see here, that they talk about malaria here. Like the NCMI site, if it's on the left-hand side and you link on it, you go to the disease. If it's in the text, then you go to the map itself. Now I don't use CDC maps for for my malaria prophylaxis very much because this is what they look like in most countries. So they're basically saying, is transmission known to occur or is it not known to occur? And it's not, is it known to occur in the last year either. It can be, did it occur 5 years ago? So you could have an area where malaria has been eradicated for 5 years and it will still show up red on here. And so if you use this as your sole source, you may be putting people on chemoprophylaxis who don't necessarily warrant it. But that's what their map looks like. The World Health Organization, one of the difficulties with this is oftentimes things are either in a program or in a health topic and not necessarily in a country or vice versa. So sometimes you have to look at health topics, programs, and countries to figure out to see if they have something that you actually need. And when you look at their information that they do on the countries, a lot of it is based, as you can see here, on non-communicable diseases and general health issues, and that's the role of the World Health Organization. It's not a Center for Disease Prevention. It's a World Health Organization, and so sometimes you will see something like the fact that there's some Guillain-Barré going on in Colombia and Venezuela. Of course, that dates back to 2016. And then when you look at their country profile, usually more of it has to do with chronic issues like child malnutrition or nutrition and alcohol, tobacco use, things like that. Occasionally, you will find something that's related to us, like their malaria map. Their malaria maps are not bad, but the problem with their malaria maps, as you see it when we pull it up here, is that they rely on the surveillance that the country sends to them. So sometimes the country will send them really good information, and then it'll be you'll be pretty comfortable. But a lot of times the country will send them information that is either deficient because their surveillance system is broken in some way, or sometimes even because politically they're not interested in sharing the fact that they're in the middle of an outbreak, because it might actually negatively influence trade and commerce. So let me see if we can get back to somewhere on that where it's not actually, try one more, maybe it'll come through. And if it won't, you'll just have to take my word for it. And when you take a look at the map, you'll kind of see, for example, the map of Colombia there that we can't see has one area in the middle of the Amazon that looks like it has a high prevalence, and then right next to it there's an area that looks like there's no disease transmission at all. And I can guarantee you there's disease transmission there. It's just whatever is wrong with the reporting system is wrong with the reporting system. And the last one I'll just kind of show you, just because the time issues, is traffic. So like I said, if you click on through the portal and you go down here to create an account with CME, then you can use your .mil address and have an account set up that is a unique account for you that you can access without having to have your CAD card or anything. The other thing that you might want to take advantage of with Travex is that by using it, you get up to 20 hours of free CME a year. You get a half hour of credit for every time you do a search on it, whether it's on a disease topic or on the health issues of a destination. So some people find that useful. It has a report builder where if you're going to several different countries in succession, you can actually have it build a report that goes that kind of helps you understand as you transit through the countries if there are any unique considerations. And that's helpful with yellow fever, because many of you are aware that yellow fever certificates are needed for many countries when you come into them. So if you're going from here to Rio, well, Rio's kind of in the middle. There's still no requirement, clinical requirement right in Rio, even though the yellow fever outbreak got kind of close to it. But if you're going to Rio and then you're going to, and you don't need yellow fever. If you're going to La Paz, you need yellow fever because of the height and the elevation there. But if you're coming from Brazil, anywhere in Brazil, into Bolivia, you need a yellow fever certificate. And so if you were looking at risks, you wouldn't recommend somebody have yellow fever, but administratively, they have to have it because of the way they're transiting. And if you use the report builder, it'll tell you those things so that you don't have to look at each of them individually. And it's a little more complex right now because many of you know they changed the international health regulation last summer to lifelong immunity for the yellow fever vaccine. So some countries have gone over to where it's lifelong. If you have one certificate from any time of your life, you're good to go. Others are still saying that you need one every 10 years to come in. For our military people, it's a little bit less of an issue, because even though there's good science behind the lifelong immunity, and I'm sure you're going to have a yellow fever lecture here, our immunization healthcare branch still recommends a 10-year booster on it. So they're in uniform. In theory, they're going to be going out with a 10-year booster. But then you can go to things by destination, just like with the others. And when you go there, then as you pull it up, it immediately goes to something that it starts with travel immunizations. And you can see here that it has two recommendations on the DoD side. One is what is recommended for travelers in general, and the other is what is the DoD requirement. This comes straight from the immunization healthcare branch. And is updated every day, so you can see that as it goes through. And then, in a case like this WHO requirement, this has to do with the yellow fever recommendation. After you get through with those things that have vaccine preventable nature to them and routine immunizations, then it'll usually, if malaria is present, there will be a paragraph on malaria. There are maps on it, which I'll show you what their map looks like in a second. But there also is a description in case you don't have the ability to print out a map. And then it has other concerns, so altitude, dengue, chik, Zika, marine hazards, TB, rickettsial. So it'll have a ton of other things that are either have a relatively healthy endemic level to them, or if there's an epidemic going on, it'll be there as well. If you up here hit the cross-cultural tab, it'll tell you a little bit about some of the cultural issues where you're going. So, you'll know if you're in Brazil, you do not want to do this because you're not telling somebody it's okay, you're flipping them off. So little things like that, you can pick up from the cross-cultural thing. If you want to know security issues, the consular advice from the UK, Canadian, Australian, and US embassies are all consolidated in there. I'll show you a little bit more on hospitals. You can get the hospitals in the country that way, but I'll show you through this resource section in a minute. And then if you just want handouts on any of the vaccines or some of the basic preventive measures to give out to people, you can do it that way. So on the maps, one of their maps, like this is their malaria map right here, which is what it defaults to. If you type in the name of a country, then help me out here. G, right? That's right. Yeah. Then it'll actually go right to the country and kind of pull it out for you. So if you have if you're being deployed to some little city somewhere, then you can put in that city's name. It uses Google Maps to find it, so it'll find it for you. It's a recommendation on what you should do map, not a risk map. So if it's red or if it's crosshatched red, then chemoprophylaxis is recommended. And for us, the crosshatch red are other activities, like people who are going to go outside of the wire. Well, since we're all doing that as military people, for us, crosshatch red is the same as red. The crosshatch gray is insect precautions, only no chemoprophylaxis. And within the cities, you'll see some of them are a black dot and some of them are an open dot, and that depends on how well they're actually doing the fumigation and vector control in the city itself. So if you know somebody's just going to go to a hotel in a city that's really well fumigated, they're going to be there for a day and then come out, then you may not use chemoprophylaxis because that city has great, great vector control. So it depends a lot on the mission, and that's a decision that you guys have to make as clinical providers. I mentioned that there's the resource section where you can look up different hospitals or airports or emergency facilities, and it can either be based on a list view or on a map view. And then when you go to this, you can actually, as you click on it, that's the number of hospitals that are in the database. And then as you zoom in on a particular area, you can either zoom in, just like a scan and zoom, where you can go through you can put the name of where you're going. If you know the name of the facility or the name of the city, you can put that in and find it. But I'm going to make you guys busy while I get the Bogota here. And then when you get into a city, then it'll have a bunch of the hospitals there. Some of these demographic information. Some of them, like that little one on the side, means that one's got a level 1 trauma center. So if you click on it, you'll get a ton of information on something like that, because that was visited a couple of years ago by somebody in person, and then as you just go through it, there's just a lot of information from HLZ, GPS coordinates to bed capabilities to when the specialists are there. So that's Travis. So those are some of the ones that you have access to that are either open access or are limited access. There are things that are classified, and I mentioned NCMI as one of those. Yes.
Who does the hospital assessments on traffic?
So who does it? People that we know. So I teach that for them. I teach people how to do hospital assessments, and then we know that it's somebody that's learned how to do one. Then they come back and there's a list. But then sometimes the special ops folks will send us things that their agent deltas have come out and done, and we'll cross-check whatever we can to make sure it's valid information. Put those in. When the White House goes out and does an advance for the president, a lot of times that goes in. If British Petroleum's going somewhere and they have some people that we've taught that we know that they actually have a clue on how to do assessments that come in, then we'll do it. So it's kind of a variety of people to do it, and it's based. And so some areas have a lot of information on them because there was somebody who had a need for information there. Others, it may just be kind of random bits of information based on somebody having done a visit there one time. Did that answer your question?
It does.
Okay. So one of the nice things about classified systems is that the information is very vetted, but one of the problems is getting to that sometimes. I mean, I only had one job where I actually had a separate terminal pretty close to me, hooked in with my desk, and there was another job I had where it was, just down the hall a little bit, but most of the jobs I had, it was like in another building, and it was kind of a little bit of a hassle to maintain my account and get there on a regular basis. And so sometimes that can be a little bit of a disadvantage. And here's some of the different sites that are out there, some of which are medical, a lot of which are on here because they have ChemBio stuff, which can affect us as medical, especially when it comes to the bio threat issues of it. And along that line, there are some collaborative resources, many of which are biologic threat related, where people get into, they're not actually chat rooms, because that makes it sound a little like it's just people talking to each other, but discussion forums where people can actually work, and these can be both on the high side or the low side as well. And so the Department of Homeland Security runs one called Wildfire that talks about it. There's a Bio-Defense Knowledge Center also run by the Homeland Security folks. And then there are a couple universities who have a couple sites as well. So if you're interested in that, those are potential there. And then there are many other resources. So obviously we hit several, but I mean I highlighted a couple so you guys can look at them. From an emerging disease and outbreak perspective, I found that the World Health Organization, Global Alert, the CDC Health Alert, and GeoSentinel do a really good job external to the DoD, but within the DoD we have an Armed Forces Health Surveillance Branch that's part of the Defense Health Agency, and so this is, they have a biosurveillance division that actually is looking at those things. I mentioned previously, that when you're looking at outbreaks, Health Map will oftentimes, just because it's got a dot on there doesn't mean it's an outbreak. It could be a single case of undiagnosed fever in Zimbabwe. But when you look through there, sometimes you find things that are outbreaks, and ProMed is the same kind of thing where you can kind of see things early. And immunizations, I mentioned the Immunization Healthcare Branch. That's their website up there. So if you want to go straight to the horse's mouth, you can get the information from them. But the CDC has the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices information always up to date on their site as well. Internationally, a couple of the other countries have some really great resources. Canada's Travel Health source is a really good one. The UK has a couple sites that I like quite a bit, the National Travel Health Networking Center and Travel Health UK, and so those are a couple of other international sources that are out there. If you speak French or Spanish, there's a couple other sites, and German actually, there's a good German site as well out there. Sometimes you're looking for overseas assistance. Now we have usually, the way that we normally end up getting out of an area if we need it or getting help is we have something in place either through arrangements that we have with the International SOS organization or through our own medical evacuation and treatment facility systems. And if you guys are traveling overseas, either individually with your families or as a group, if you go to the TricareOverseas.com site down there, it will give you a phone number in every country that you can call to find out where could I go to be seen by somebody that is in the TRICARE network. The advantage of that is that you then usually, if everything's set up properly, don't have to pay out of pocket. Unless you're a retiree like me, you still have to pay out of pocket, but you get reimbursed for it. But it also, just kind of can give you a little bit of a warm fuzzy that there is something available for you if you're going in there, and maybe maybe something you want to take a look at. Certainly, if it's a military mission, through your component and or the actual combat command itself, you're going to have some system set up that you can reach back and hit one of the theater or global patient movement requirements centers, the GPMRC or TPMRC East or West. And if you do that, then they can actually initiate an evacuation for you based on need out of there. And so that information is something I don't have here, but is available through your components and or your combat commands for the different geographic areas of responsibility.
International ISOS will actually do that for
Yes.
you while you're out on mission. I'm in charge of multiple pathways missions happening in the Pacific right now. We coordinate directly with International ISOS.
Right.
They also will assist you with identifying specifically the hospitals that are TRICARE approved, which have also been DoD inspected and approved for utilization if you've got large scale missions going on throughout the globe.
Absolutely.
So they're a great resource.
And that TRICARE number gets you to a help desk, which is part of that network. If you guys are going somewhere internationally and your component, which is, for example, if you're going into the Pacific Theater, that would be is it the 6th Fleet out there? No, it's which fleet's out and with you with PAC Fleet. So anyway, PAC Fleet, if you're Army, USAR PAC, if you're Navy PAC, if you're Air Force PAC-AF, if those people don't know you're going, you've made a mistake in your coordination, so they need to know that you're going, but then there are also people who can just help you make sure that your evacuation plan is what it needs to be for going into that area. There are some consumer-oriented things out there. Just keep in mind as you look through these things, that oftentimes they'll give you information, but they'll be focused on what are they going to sell you. So if it's like a medical gear thing, they'll tell you about all these different injuries that you might get in a certain area. They'll say, and by the way, here's a beautiful first aid kit that we have that you can buy for $12.99 and take with you. So not that they're bad sites, some of them have some good information on it, but just keep in mind that they do have, they're trying to sell something. Some of the professional societies, like the Society of Tropical Medicine and Hygiene or the International Society of Tropical Medicine, have some good resources. Some of those are restricted to people who are members of those societies, and some of it's open source information, and so you might keep an eye on some of them. You can get involved in listservs if you want to. ProMed can send you something. They send, I don't do ProMed. The only reason I do ProMed is that it sends me a lot of stuff, more than I want to comb through and figure out. I've found that some of them are that way, and you just have to take a peek at them and see which ones may or may not work for you. And for some people, none of them work because you just don't like the extra email burden. There are, as I mentioned, there are not a whole lot of mobile applications I've seen out there. If somebody has some, please let me know. But some of the you can actually get full journals and download them, and so certainly that's a good resource to have with you. Usually you end up paying for those. And like last time I looked, the Oxford Tropical Medicine Handbook, just to download it was $53, and 81 cents. And so I'm not really sure where the 81 cents came in. But that was the price they were advertising on it. But something like Harry Arden's books are a little bit less expensive, and so you may look to download that. There for people who actually have access to UpToDate, which I know through the Air Force, through the Knowledge Exchange, we have access to UpToDate, and then you can download the mobile app on your phone, and you can download UpToDate on your phone, and then you can have that with you. So that's one that you don't have to subscribe for it because it's covered through the military subscription. And there are a couple out there that you might see. I mean, CDC has a couple like Can I Eat This? It's kind of more entertaining than functional to me. It's like, okay, you know, what I mean, and, you know, they'll have something that's like, can I eat, you know, some nasty thing off of a street vendor that looks like flies are on it? And the answer is no. And that's the you know, but so I don't know that it's that helpful. But I mean, for travelers, like the people who you're sending out who may not be medics, it could be helpful because maybe it'll just make them, you know, pay a little more attention to the food and water precautions that you've given them if you have them downloaded. So some of them, you know, might be a little bit, might be okay there as well. And I noticed that overseas, a lot of the providers that I work with internationally use apps for their communication, you know, for communication, especially WhatsApp is one that's super common in a lot of countries for communicating with other providers when you're traveling. A few seconds on the travel teleconsultation program and I'll be done. This is just the contact information from it. Mr. Lappin's a retired Army Lieutenant Colonel who runs it out of Fort Sam right now. This is in kind of a little bit of a flux right now, so this is still active, but next year this may not be the case because they're trying to actually really enhance the telemedicine and make it into more of a portal type activity, whereas right now it's still kind of an email-based activity. And so there's a for each specialty that you request a consult on, there's several people who receive that simultaneously. So it's kind of first come, first serve on who's going to get back to you with an answer on it. Those are most of the email addresses. On the slides you have, there's another series of addresses that are on that slide with some of the other specialties that are on there. And if you ever have a question because you don't either know what the address is or you're not getting an answer in time, then you can always email Mr. Lappin directly, and then he can make sure that it's got to the right person. And so those groups sometimes will send you an undeliverable message if their own individual mailbox is full. Don't worry about that. It's gotten to the other 10 people on the list. It's not that you're not going to be seen at all. Like I say, if there's any problem, you can always follow up with Mr. Lappin to be sure. So my recommendations just in general, one thing is stay a little bit informed as a baseline. So whatever works for you. Everybody has a different potential system. Some people like a pull system where you just access information as needed. Some people like to have things pushed to them, and that's a matter of personal preference, and certainly not a right or a wrong to that. And all of those different things are out there that could potentially help you with that, some of which we talked about. And the other thing is just make sure your system works for you, because what works for you is not going to work for me, and what works for me is not going to work for you necessarily. Don't wait until you have I need all this information in 2 hours request. If you can, try to figure out, play with things a little bit in your own spare time, and because all of you have so much spare time, and just kind of see what really works for you and what you like and what you think is going to be right for you. And the other thing is, collaborate and share as much as you can. You guys will know each other from this class. You'll know some of the instructors through this class. Reaching out to experts. I can guarantee you that, well, I can't guarantee you all, but I would say with, over 90–95% of the people that you meet throughout here would be more than happy to answer an email from you on any question that you might have, because most people don't get into education unless they're willing to and enjoy that kind of interaction as well. So, collaborate with people you know already, and I think that'll serve you really well. So I didn't leave a ton of time for questions, a full 2 minutes. But are there some questions that I could answer? Yes.